Welcome to the Generous Benefits Podcast, where we educate employers on creating meaningful and impactful benefits. I'm your host, Amanda Brummitt. In this episode, you'll hear from two real deal girl dads and insurance gurus, Bret Brummitt and Alex Dampf. Bret owns Generous Benefits in Austin and brings a refreshing human-centered approach to employee benefits. He's passionate about helping employers design health plans that actually work for their people and their bottom line. Alex is the founder and president of Oakmont Benefits in Nashville, Tennessee, where he helps employers challenge the status quo and reclaim control over their healthcare spend. With a background in finance and a reputation for asking hard questions, Alex brings clarity even to the murkiest parts of the benefits world. Together, they dig into the complex role of pharmacy benefit managers, what they do, how they make money, and why more employers are starting to question whether their PBM is truly on their side. Tell me how you guys know each other, because you're competitors, right?
We are. I mean, Alex is trying to poach a group in my backyard.
That's fair.
Really?
Yeah.
Stay out of Austin, Alex.
I am out of Austin. I'm way over in Abilene.
Yeah. Alex was a friend of a friend and is now a friend. I mean, as the short story, I'll give Adam Berkowitz credit for the introduction between the two of us. But he pulled Alex over at a conference back in like 2017 or 2018 and said, "Hey, we're doing this together." And since then, we've been doing it together.
Yeah.
Nice. And you're both girl dads, right? I was trying to come up with something clever about tea parties or Taylor Swift songs. Have y'all bonded over this ever?
I mean, the girl dad part, yeah. But I mean, as I say, my girls are a lot younger. So I think Brett laughs at some of the things that I say we're going through the middle of. And he's like, oh, yeah, it's going to get better. Just wait.
Yeah.
It does get better. They're so cool now.
They were cool all along. They're just a different kind of cool now. And they were a very different kind of cool for a few years.
Right.
Yes. I disagree. I did actually always think they were cool, but that's okay.
Yeah, we are firmly in the weeds with the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old.
Yeah, they are. They are babies.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's get into insurance then. So it's easier than rearing children.
No.
I'm going to start with you. Let's start with the basics. What is a pharmacy benefit manager, and how did they become such an important player in healthcare?
Use very ambiguous for who we're starting with, but I'll take it.
Oh. Bret, what's a PBM? And how did they become to rule my world?
I mean, they are kind of the big, bad, ugly boogeyman right now in healthcare. But also that's because prescriptions have become way more relevant in the healthcare model and system than they used to be. I mean, it was the impetus of, hey, people used to go to the pharmacy, pay for everything, submit an insurance receipt to the insurance carrier, and then lo and behold, someone came in as the middleman to make that process a little bit easier. So pharmacies could, directly submit claims. That's when they'll, the need for the insurance ID card, the plastic ID card, I would attribute that more to the PBM pharmacy space than the insurance company space, because that was the first facilitation of drugs for a copay instead of getting reimbursed for them. You take that, fast forward that a few decades, now insurance companies have outsourced what that formulary list is, how to manage it, how to add cost control things in there, like step therapy, prior authorizations, the things that are lined with the intent of saving dollars through drug procurement or appropriate care. And you'd layer that with some rebates and some kickbacks and really weird things of starting to integrate a supply chain and pharmacies owning drugstores, pharmacy or PBMs owning drugstores, PBMs owning specialty drug locations, mail order services. And there's a whole vertical where you can now scrape a little bit more money for a business need and direct them up something you own and start your own little monopolies within a healthcare plan or a provider alignment. And they are no longer like just solving one problem. They've created lots of ways to solve different problems and make revenue on each of them. And so that becomes kind of problematic along the lines when you keep adding price to something that a consumer needs for their health and not just for, improving their life sometimes.
Okay. And Alex, before we get too far into all the yucky stuff that they do that Bret alluded to, can you kind of walk me through as an employer why I would want a PBM, how they could help me save money, manage pharmacy costs? Like, what are they doing in the background?
Well, I think for all the things Brett said, at the end of the day, employers still are not. Most employers, I'll say, mid market, the normal ones we see, don't have the capabilities to go out and negotiate drug pricings with all the different manufacturers and all the different pharmacies. I mean, the contract management, the formula, building the formularies, having the, I'll say like the medical advice or the science behind everything of what is going to be covered and negotiating those rebates with manufacturers. I think that's still probably a little bit out of reach for most, and so they need to outsource that, just like they do a TPA or, even if they don't want to do that, they're buying a fully insured plan from somebody. They're just not ready, and so they have to have some entity that they can offload that to.
Okay, so they are necessary for sure then. And then are they actually saving employers money and are there hidden profit models that Bret so clearly alluded to?
um, I, I think it's harder and harder to say that they're saving employers money. I think that the law of large numbers still kind of holds true, that if you're negotiating, the more buying power that you have in a perfect world should drive down the prices. I think when you start wrapping in some of the things Brett alluded to, of all these kind of different revenue streams and hidden, non-transparency that we hear so much about in the news, um, it's becoming harder and harder, I think, to justify that the savings are there. Like, are we at a point where we're cost neutral now? Or are we starting to get to the point where it is costing us more money? We'd be better off if we went direct. I think we're still trying to figure that out because the data is still not great in a lot of places. And so, I'd say from an opportunity cost or just like a time cost, they're saving money, right? Because nobody's going to go hire a pharmacist to go manage all of that for them. But I think it's becoming harder and harder to justify some of these things, which I think is why we got into this kind of vertical integration in a lot of places.
So, Bret, do you want to dive into potential conflicts of interest that exist when the health plan and the PBM are the same company?
Sure. And that is more of a recent, and I'll say recent, like a 10-year decade kind of frame of reference, more of a recent scenario than it was prior to the last decade or two, where, a health plan owns a PBM or, acquires certain pharmacy benefit managers or starts loading in different pharmacy point solutions into their ownership. And so when you have that, you as a consumer, you're just getting whatever, in most cases, what your employer provides or what your entity's program provides that they're purchasing. And they are definitely incentivized either through this is all that we offer, these are who we're integrated with, these are the ones we can integrate with for cheaper, or these are the ones we'll integrate with and give you the largest, rebate off your healthcare admin. So you do have a lot of incentives as an employer or a purchasing organization to choose the pharmacy benefit managers that are owned by that company, and you don't really get a chance to look at all of the drug acquisition costs or the different revenue streams that they're making on those programs. So someone may want to go to say, I want to get the best PBM out there for my company, for my members, for my drug costs. And instead of looking for a list of 16, now they're narrowed down to a list of three. And then that list of three has one that's super incentivized on an admin cost, but not on the drug cost. And when you're trying to make a purchase decision, if you're focused on, your fixed monthly pricing, that can be a wild variable on who knows what our employees or our membership is going to choose in the back end. So that becomes a real big conflict of interest when the choice is cut down between the insurance carrier or the TPA and the PBM. The other one that I'm actually more worried about from a conflict of interest is the TPA, the plan administrator, the pharmacy benefit manager, some of the other point solutions that are supposed to save control that are all owned by a private equity or venture capital firm bundled up together where they're trying to create those same kind of cost synergies that were there under the health insurance purchasing of a PBM or a PBM purchasing of a health insurance carrier. They're seeing that as a scope. And again, that creates another like subcategory of conflicts of interest within an ownership, and you're putting guardrails on what someone can choose, and again highly incentivizing things that feed themselves versus creating the best opportunity for the member at times. Not that they're all bad, but there is that conflict of interest that sometimes isn't disclosed.
Yeah, I think the disclosure part is the what's important. It needs to be transparent. And Brett, since you're talking about choices for an employer, I assume a fully insured product, they get little to no choice. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, your fully insured product are off the shelf products. The carrier or the insurance company is making that choice. The same thing is true in some of the pre aligned or preset self funded, level funded models. They're creating a product stack, to take a more lingo ish term,
Hmm.
that is going to be a set piece. So again, you're still taking something off the shelf that has some upside potentials for you because someone has figured out how to make money doing something better, aka cheaper than a fully insured model, or at least providing an opportunity through a transfer risk into something that should give the employer some upside, but they're still aligning it within a preset set of vendors that they work well together with or they think work well together with.
Yeah. Okay. And then, Alex, I recently learned about spread pricing. And I mean, I've worked in healthcare almost 25 years and had never heard of it and just was mortified. Can you explain what that is and how it affects employers?
Sure. I mean, spread pricing at its basic is that you as a member have a copay for or see a price of a medication that's going to be filled through your insurance and it's $15. And so that's what you pay. Um, but that medication actually only costs $7, but the insurance still charges the member the $15, and then they take the difference, the $8, and that's profit. So that's, I mean, that they're just, it's not the true price. It's got a buffer built into it that's as an additional revenue stream.
And how would an employer know if they were being affected by it?
So it's hard. I mean, contract language, one place you have to start, the data. So being able to see, not just this was the name of the medication, this is the date it was filled, and this is the price you paid. I mean, being able to see dispensing cost and what pricing methodology they're using, because most contracts are using two or three, you got MAC or WAC or AWP, all these funny lingo or acronyms that people like to use. And so there's always if you don't have the contract language to line it up to if they're going to use the one that's best for them or they're going to use the one that's best for you. So you have to have all the data points in the data set to be able to analyze it. I think that's sometimes we see as people will say, oh, we have access to our data, but it's an incomplete data set. So it doesn't really paint the picture or tell you what you need to know.
Yeah. And is that something the broker would typically drive? A
In
good
my experience,
broker?
yeah, in my experience, yes. I mean, I think that's where we're starting to see the shift of what I'll say expertise or services are being expected of a consultant. It's not so much of Blue Cross versus Aetna versus United Healthcare. Now it's, well, what does the contract say, and how does that language affect me, and how does it affect my employees, and what gaps are there potentially that someone could take advantage of or loopholes.
Yeah, definitely. And is that language, is it typically negotiable? Or is it just that you find a different PBM that has more favorable language?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I think
Okay.
you're gonna if you went some of it's depending on size, right? So I think if you've got 50,000 employees, again, we got that law of large numbers, you're probably able to go to one of the top, the big three or four PBMs and have some leverage to redo some contracts a little bit more customizable. But if you're an employer with 200 employees, probably not going to be able to have Optum let you really redline that agreement. So that's where you have to kind of move into some of these smaller boutique PBMs. And a lot of it is just their philosophy of what they're willing to redline, what they're not willing to redline. I think most of the good ones today, that's a standard practice of, lesser than language, lowest net cost. Regardless of what calculation we're going to use, we're going to find the one that is the best for the client. And that's typically where you start getting into how they're being paid, right? Tracking their revenue sources.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. Okay, so Brett, I know there's some emerging alternatives to big PBMs, things like transparent models, pass-through contracts. Are any of those promising? Should employers be looking at them?
Absolutely. I mean, your biggest buzzword, I think, in the last, again, 5 years is probably your transparent or your pass through PBM. Transparent doesn't always mean pass through. A lot of times they're overlapping. The goal there is that the employer, if there's a rebate on the on the drug, then that is not being retained by the PBM, that's being passed back to the employer. So most employers, when they're first stepping into this, sometimes instead of taking the rebates from the drugs that their members receive, will take an admin credit, like a $30 a month, an $18 a month, $45 a month flat fixed fee off of their admin invoices instead of taking rebates. That typically is never, not always, but that has I'll give a scenario. I have a client that we did that with. That membership was predominantly on generic medications. There wasn't a lot of brand name, no specialty at the time. And for that year, it was great for them. They would have made out ahead, which I would say is an anomaly, because anytime that contract is in place, if you then have a member that has, a bad cancer diagnosis, now you're moving from generic drugs to super high dollar drugs, and now the PBM is taking those $2,000 on $18,000 rebate drugs for themselves, not going back to the employer, who is now paying a lot larger sum for the drugs than they were ever paying before. They really need those rebates, if they exist, to come back to them, because they're fronting so much more costs than they had planned on. So from that model, things like transparent or pass-through PBMs are great, as long as, again, the contract is there for that part for the employer to get those kind of pass-through costs. The transparent part is just simply the model of, we're going to show you what we're making, and so now you don't really have to guess about it. And those have been really great players, a huge push in the industry to move everybody a little bit more towards them as they start to take interest in market share. And so the employer should look at them. The downside is that there have been times we have used those, and that actual cost per prescription has not always been as good as it might have been in a traditional model. So even though it is a pass through, that net price still rules the day of what's coming out of the employer's check register each day, week, or month, when that dollar leaves their account to go fund and pay back what the PBMs pay.
And so are those more interesting plan types? Is that something that, does the TPA bring that to the employer, or TPA, does the PBM bring that to the employer? Or I guess the TPA could, or is that the broker who introduces that conversation?
Around the transparent models, a lot of times it could be the broker consultant, it could be the TPA that has an interesting alignment they bring to the table. A lot of times it is the PBM marketing themselves, either back through the employer, back through the TPA, so that someone knows about it. And then it is all right, they're out there, they have a great model. Now, do they even coordinate with my plan administrator I have in place? Or, like, I want to make this change, but it's not even in there. Do I, the employer, have to be the first one to create something new that isn't available? And we're going to have the membership work through the kinks of what this is going to affect downstream at point of service. And so those are a lot of the hurdles through that process. I would say most of those have been conquered, but again, good questions to ask when moving towards that model, to know what hurdles you might face.
Yeah. And then if the broker and the TPA are involved in that, do they also expect a cut? Are they trying to get paid on it too? Sorry, guys, not to put you on the spot.
Not Alex and I, but Alex, take that away.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say something about Brett's previous answer. So I think we're seeing, this switch from, or this transition from self-funding or partially self-funding really coming downstream, is that employers want to embrace that, but they also recognize, there's a lot more moving parts here that I'm going to have to manage, and there's some downstream implications to that, not just to me as an employer, but to my employees as well, right? Like, name recognition in the healthcare space is a huge deal,
Yeah.
and so if they don't recognize the name on the ID card, we're going to have some friction. And so I think, we're starting to see like TPAs that go, okay, here are two paths for you, right? You're moving into this kind of independent world, but here's a contract that we've negotiated based on our block of business with one of the big threes. So you're going to get some comfort with that. We're trying to protect you a little bit. Are there hidden revenue streams on the backside of those contracts? Probably. But to Brett's point, we're trying to get to the lowest net cost. Can't get there in one day. Or here's, if you want to go full in, here's a transparent PBM. It might be a little clunky, but you're going to get your data to everything. And so you have to weigh the trade-offs of each one of those. And so that, I think that's where a lot of people really, I'll say, kind of rely on their broker, is what are the pros and cons to each one of these pathways. And at the end of the day, what's the worst that could happen if we go this path, or what's the worst that could happen if we go that path?
Yeah, for sure. And then do you want to comment on the TPA or the broker getting paid on
Yeah.
prescriptions?
Yeah. I mean, I think we know that brokers and consultants are getting paid through the pharmacy plans. We see it in the contracts. We see it in the revenue shares. We see it in these RFPs. Um, we also just kind of know, I think most of us would recognize, we'll have an idea of what the average compensation should be based on the group size. If you've done it long enough, you just kind of know. And so when you have conversations with new companies or new prospects, and you see that the revenue is extremely low, you, just as business owners, that it can't really work this way. Somebody's losing money somewhere, so there has to be more money. There has to be money somewhere. Whether I can find it or I can't find it is a different question, but we know there's more money somewhere. And so, yeah, I think it's very common that that's part of it. I mean, we see that in this kind of move to these big GPO models,
Mm.
where a big consulting firm will say, we have a preferred PBM. It's through this method. We've negotiated because we have hundreds of thousands of lives, but we can see that the drug pricing, when we get our hands on data for individual companies, like to Brett's point, you're not getting the best deal. We see all these extra line items, and you see the revenue. So we definitely know people are making money in those spaces. And again, I don't know that it's a bad thing that people make money in that space. I think it's the non-disclosure, the lack of transparency of going, we're going to move this way, and here's kind of what we show you we make. But over here, hidden in page 11 of this 50-page contract, there's one sentence in the middle of a paragraph that just says, oh, by the way, we're going to get $1.50 per script, and no one ever talks about it again. It's like, well, we disclosed it. It's in that contract they signed. It's like, well, maybe not. I don't know how many people actually read those contracts.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you make a really good point on the transparency. Although to me, a per script commission still feels yucky. I'd rather
Oh
pay
yeah,
somebody a consulting fee to just
sure.
work on the whole thing, but I'm not in charge of healthcare.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. So, Alex, how can an employer actually tell if their PBM contract is working for them or against them?
I think it all starts with the data, right? You have to be able to
Hmm.
kind of know where you were, which is hard. And some, if you're coming from a fully insured environment, you may not be able to really tell. Um, we're really good at this industry of creating artificial benchmarks, like per employee per year, per employee per month numbers, to do comparisons when something could have changed, right? To Brett's point, you could have a year where no one's using any specialty medications, and the next year, two people get cancer diagnoses, and there's six-figure medications running through the plan. Nothing really changed with the contracts or where the scripts are being filled, but we just have new meds. And so I think you really need data sets year over year to be able to say, okay, our generic, like we can actually look at this medication, atorvastatin, we see 10 milligrams, 90-day supplies are X. And now, you know, 24 months later, atorvastatin, 10 milligram, 90-day supplies are Y. Are we better or are we worse than where we were before? How are our rebate dollars tracking up or down? Um, what's the formulary look like? Are we the biosimilars? Like, are our formularies consistently changing to follow the new drugs that are coming to market? How are our medical standards of how we do prior authorizations and step therapy, to try to get a big picture, based on drilled down data.
That's awesome. Okay, question for both of you. We have talked about the good things, but a lot of bad things about PBMs and people in the space right now. But I know there have to be good ones out there. So, are there? And if so, who are they? What do you love about them?
I guess I have to go first on that one too, Brett.
Yep. I'm giving you the deadpan stare. I'm like, yeah, you take that one.
I'm sure, yeah, I think there are good PBMs out there. I think there's like anything in this industry, no one's perfect, and every day there's something new that's happening. And so for us and our agency, we have two or three that we really like. We've done some deep vetting with the risk council. We've gone through contracts. We know the contracts are going to be the same. And we have like our set language that we're always going to make sure is in those contracts. So the contract things are the basic parts of it, and then the second part is like, how do we deal with members, because we know there's going to be issues that are going to pop up. So what does customer service look like? How do we deal with these new, when a medication comes through for $100,000, like what is the process? How do they integrate with other parts of the health plan? So I mean, I think there are a couple that we like. If you want names, I can. I'll give you names.
I do need one of you to talk about Halo scripts because if neither of
Okay.
you do, I'm going to, and you're
Okay.
going to do it
So
better.
yeah. So, well, Halo Script's not a PBM, right? So it's kind of a
Oh,
bolt on.
okay.
Um, but from the PBM space, I mean, we really like a company called RX Preferred, which is a local PBM to us in our market in Tennessee. True Scripts are two; those are the two that we work with the most, that we've had the most success with, and being flexible on contract language, trying to, I think, really put the client at the forefront of how we make decisions, and helping everyone understand the data, because if you've read one PBM contract, you've read one PBM contract. And so
Mm.
sometimes having some insights from that side of the aisle to say, well, this is why we have it this way. You know, Here are the other options, but these are the downstream implications of making those changes, and just being able to talk through it. I mean, again, we tell employees in enrollment meetings all the time, like, you're an adult. We'll help you give access to data to make a decision, but I'm not your mom. I'm not your dad. Like, you're an adult. You make your decision based on the data that you have available. So we'll try to give you as much data as possible so that you can make a decision for you and your family.
And Brett, before you go
Mhm.
on, Alex, do you want to explain what a bolt-on is?
so, so PBM at its core negotiates drug prices for employers, insurance companies. They create the formulary. They kind of that middleman that deal just with the pharmacy. Some PBMs in-house have cost containment services. So maybe that's international sourcing or going directly to manufacturers, mail, and all those different things. So bolt-on is one of those things that maybe they don't do in-house. They allow a third party to integrate with them to manage one specific part of the plan.
Yeah, and I think Alex touched on something pretty cool back when we talk about the PBMs we like to work with. Like the customer service standpoint is something that's very hard to see in a contract language or before you use them, but it makes a really big difference on how that plan works if that customer service department, one, is available and caring, and then two, if that same customer service department understands the different like cost containment avenues for the prescriptions, and they can be the person that helps intervene and say, cool, if let's pick up your drug here, or we can do something a little different if you'd like to pay less, or kind of redirect the source, whether that's location or how that drug is obtained, because the PBMs manage different levels of cost containment. So we've again, with I've never used preferred, but um, the TrueScripts has been good for us. SmithRx has been good for a few of our groups. One of the ones that is private equity owned now has traditionally been really good for one of our subset of clients, and also have been watched that. That's kind of almost the kiss of death for a lot of PBMs, is once they get purchased or acquired, a lot of the good ones, and especially the ones that are newer or disrupting the space, do get acquired. And so some of the good ones go through that maturity period where maybe they're not quite as good, where everybody's having to realign the rules of engagement in the road, and come out through the other side of how we're going to work, with new business alignments. And I've been really happy with the Livinity team as they've come through that process, and matured through that as well in their PBMs.
All right, now do you guys want to tell everybody who sucks? No, I'm just kidding. Don't answer that. Any last thoughts or anything we missed about PBMs that you would want HR people, CFOs, benefits buyers to know?
Alex, why don't you take off some of the contract timings? Because I know you review contracts a lot.
I mean, one of the things that we see pretty universally are like these really long, um, like initial engagement, timeframes, right? Like 3 years is the initial engagement. And if you
Whoa.
leave or try to leave prior to 36 months, these huge penalties. And so I think that I mean, that's usually like the very first thing we ask. Are like, okay, so let's talk about these initial renewal terms, or these evergreen clauses, like where they just keep going on and on and on, and they have kind of
Mm-hmm.
unrealistic. A lot of contracts will want 120-day, 150-day out clauses to notify someone. Well, that's great in theory. Like, understand why people want those. That's a really hard timeline in our world to meet when most decisions are being made between, if you're lucky, 120 days and 90 days. If you're normal, probably between 90 and 60 days. Um, and so, I mean, that's one. Um, the pricing methodology, like, okay, it says that we're going to do lowest net or whatever it is, but what are the methodologies? Like, how do we audit where this data is coming from? How do we get access to this data? What data are you going to give us? And so, one of the reasons we like RX Preferred is that we've set up some like secure shared folders where for every Monday, essentially, we get a list of every PA request that's come through, what's been
Prior
approved,
authorization?
yeah, prior authorization. So what's come through, what are we waiting on? We've requested, we haven't received it. It's been a week. This has been denied, and this is the denial reason. Because again, even the best ones trying to engage with the members, because we don't want someone to have to skip, right? We want them to miss their medication. So it's okay, like, hey, you've got to fill, you've got 2 weeks worth of meds left, but this PA's coming in. We don't have anything. Like, we need you to call your doctor, or we're going to call them. But we got to get the process started. Because I think it's a lot of times the blame falls on the insurance company or the PBM, and lots of times there's so many moving parts there that it's not always easy to assign blame in those situations.
And I find there's a lot of miscommunication in that time period too, where no one actually knows what they're supposed to go grab because the
Right.
terminology is very cumbersome to the member
Hmm.
and even the pharmacist at time.
Right. Yeah.
Anything else? Any final thoughts?
I mean, I would say that there's a a much higher percentage of your medical spend is in the drug plan than you would ever imagine. Even if your insurance plan or your arrangement says, you're spending, 80% on healthcare and 20% on drugs, there's a big chance that you're actually spending probably more like 40% on the drugs when you really boil down to it. You start looking at some of the other costs of the medications that then are going back to the actual transaction of healthcare needs and encounters. And so, not focusing on who's managing it, what that member experience is, and honestly, what kind of cost containments are in place, and discussing how different cost containments are either, empowering or punitive to the employee, to the member, and getting that honed out, I think would be the biggest strategic part of aligning your PBM towards your health plan, towards your costs.
Yeah. I would say that getting too hyper focused on one part. So it's really easy to hear some of the buzzwords like transparency or pass through, or rebates, um, or international, right? Like, it used to be that most of the time, if you sourced the med internationally, you were going to see a 60% savings. But now some of the rebates are so big that the net cost is almost identical. And so sometimes I think getting laser focused on one thing and not being able to step back and go, okay, wait a minute, if there's a 2% spread now on these, is it worth having someone jump through all these extra hoops? Like, is the juice worth the squeeze? And so it used to be, yeah, absolutely. But now, not always, right? I think you have to have a little flexibility. And that's why continuously studying the data, knowing what's happening in those marketplaces. And then I think everybody's just got to pay attention to what the government's going to do, right? If all of a sudden, I mean, I don't think we're going to start with commercial plans. I think we'll start with Medicare and Medicaid, but that will slowly trickle down, and the ripple effects will be huge.
Yeah. And we're months or years out from knowing what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I've seen a lot of people in this space immediately come out with advice and information, and it feels too early for me, but you guys know more about it than I do.
It is too early, and whatever rules are engaged, the new methodology to take advantage of those rules by vendors in the space will be engaged as well. I mean, as the end consumer, it kind of sucks because you really still don't have the power to play by the rules. You have to find the partnership at a level that's willing to go across an industry and build something that's to your advantage.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll do another show when that happens.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for your time. Thanks for your knowledge, and not to overuse transparency, but thanks for transparently talking about how you work and how these organizations do.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Generous Benefits Podcast. Huge thanks to Bret Brummitt and Alex Dampf for breaking down the mystery of pharmacy benefit managers. If your PBM contract has ever felt like it was written in another language, hopefully you're walking away with a little more clarity and a lot more confidence. As always, we're here to help employers ask better questions, pull better data, demand more transparency, and build benefits that actually work for their business and their people.